Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Donna Dabney. I'm the Executive Director of the Conference Board's Governance Center, and welcome to our third in our series of Director Roundtables. This series is brought to you by the thought leadership and the generous contributions brought to you by our members. Here you see them, including Alcoa, and our sponsors, including Weil. And a particular thanks to the Weil law firm, whose wonderful facilities we are using today. In fact, I can hardly see you all the way down at the end over there. It's such a large conference room. Before we begin, I'd like to just set the stage for this conversation on stakeholder capitalism. The Conference Board Governance Center in January launched a task force on investor engagement in the governance of public companies. This is a topic that has gotten a lot of press lately and a lot of interest. And so there are a couple of questions we're looking at. One is, what's the purpose of a public company? Is the purpose of the public company to increase the long-term value and sustainability of that company through serving all the stakeholders' interests, shareholders, employees, and others? Or is it solely to increase the wealth of its shareholders? If you asked this question 30 years ago, your CEOs would probably say it was the first thing. But now, more and more, and particularly in the last decade, we're seeing a lot of CEOs saying the sole purpose of the firm is to maximize the profit of shareholders. So what are the implications of that? The second question that we're looking at in the task force is the movement globally to increase the involvement of shareholders or investors in the governance of public companies. And just this morning, we saw in the newspaper that Switzerland is saying that there should be a binding vote on compensation of executives in Swiss companies. So the Conference Board launched this task force in January. We will research these developments and develop fact-based information to inform public company directors, investors, and policymakers on these, what we think to be very important questions. So this particular Directors Roundtable is part of our effort to bring the public involvement and conversation to the issue of stakeholder capitalism and shareholder capitalism. And now I'd like to introduce Mike Aiello, who is the chairman of the corporate division of Weil, to introduce our two guests.
Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Weil is pleased to be hosting this Conference Board Center Director Roundtable discussion on stakeholder capitalism, which is sponsored by the Ira M. Milstein Center for Global Markets and Corporate Ownership. I am honored today to welcome our distinguished guest, Dr. Klaus Kleinfeld, Chairman and CEO of Alcoa. Before taking over at Alcoa in 2008, Dr. Kleinfeld had a storied 20-year career with Germany's Siemens AG, where he ascended to CEO and helped to nearly double the industrial conglomerate's market capitalization. In addition to the unique cross-cultural leadership experience Dr. Kleinfeld brings to us today, he is also an author and frequent speaker at the forefront of the importance of stakeholder capitalism. He has what I believe to be a fresh perspective of the benefits that can be reaped when this model is applied correctly, and knows firsthand the challenges, the pitfalls, and the potential opportunities that exist in the United States through the adoption and application of this model. Today's interview of Dr. Kleinfeld will be conducted by Hedrick Smith, a Pulitzer Prize-winning former New York Times reporter, and editor and Emmy Award-winning producer-correspondent who has established himself over the past 50 years as one of America's most distinguished journalists. He is a former correspondent and Washington bureau chief with the New York Times and the author of several books, including his most recent work, Who Stole the American Dream, which explores the economic polarization in the United States today. As members of the collective business community, we are all too familiar with today's topic. In some sense, the question of for whom the corporation toils is as old as the corporate form itself. It has been discussed and debated for many years, but each new era brings new nuances to the debate. Years ago, Ralph Larson, then chair and CEO of Johnson & Johnson, was asked, "Do you run the company for shareholders or for the customers, suppliers, and employees?" He simply answered yes. He refused to buy into what he saw as the tyranny of the or, recognizing that the interests of these constituencies need not be in opposition. Indeed, they are best thought of as aligned. I am looking forward to this afternoon's discussion and am pleased to turn the platform over to Dr. Kleinfeld and Mr. Smith. Thank you very much and enjoy.
You're up. Okay, well, first of all, can you hear me in the back? Yes? Good, okay. And if you can't wave, you know, so that we know that we have to do something up here. Look, I was asked to open it with a reflection on this, and let me try the reflection, not knowing exactly what all questions are in there. I think the answer to the question is really simple, right? And it's exactly what was just introduced here, because I believe that it's one of the most flawed discussions that we've had, and if you exclude short-term gains, you know, from it, and are talking about sustainable shareholder returns, I very much believe that this is a function of having engaged and very talented employees, a function of having products and services that you can sell. I mean, no company can exist without it. And obviously, many, many industries, and certainly in ours, in function of how you deal with the community, in small as well as in large. You know, that's the only way how you can create long-term sustainable shareholder value, right? There is no shortcut. Again, I'm excluding transactions that are nanosecond transactions from high-frequency trading and these sort of things, because that's not the world we play in, luckily. And that's, I don't think, that's the only word where I would see that's an exception from what I just said. So if you accept that from a start, I very much believe in it. I'd be happy if anybody wants to debate this. I assume that very few would want to debate it, you know, but if you want it, open to do it. So if you believe in that, then the question is, okay, Klaus, I mean, kind of words are simple and it's a lot of warm air, but how then do you know that you are on the right track? I mean, because if shareholder value is created through these things that I mentioned, how do you know that you're on the right track in creating this? Because obviously then you're talking about looking at your balance sheet or looking at even your quarterly earnings, you know, is a view of the rear view mirror, basically. I mean, if you want to drive the company by purely looking at those kind of results, I think you're not doing justice to run the company right. So in reality, if you believe that there are these kind of drivers for strong performance, then you have to find a way how to measure that you're on the right track. So how do you measure that then? And let's start, and I mean, there's multiple ways. Obviously, that's not just one right answer. But let me tell you how we measure it. I mean, if you go to employees, right? And on the employee side, I believe that you have to look at your employee engagement, because in the end, I mean, we all know it, and I guess we've all been in situations where we felt more respected or more into it, and we gave our all. And then we had situations where we were frustrated, and we said we basically withdrew and did our 9-to-5 job, you know, and didn't give it all, right? So one of the things that we do in a very religious way, we measure employee engagement, right? And we measure this worldwide, and pretty much nobody can escape it. We have a 99-point-something response rate worldwide, so all of our 60,000 employees once a year go through a pretty good employee engagement survey. And not only do we measure it, but it is actually extremely relevant for the managers, because we can go down to the level of, I think 20 employees, 20 employee groups down to that level to take a look at how is the employee engagement doing on that end and what's driving it. I mean, we also take a look at what are the drivers and have become very, very sophisticated in looking at that. One thing that we saw, and that's very interesting, is that there is a difference between truly engaged employees and truly disengaged employees. It's not the same function that drives the disengagement that drives engagement. And it's very interesting and actually very simple when you peel the onion. You may or may not know that Alcoa prides itself as being a company where values are extremely important. And one of the values in our industry that is particularly important, because a lot of the front end part is heavy industry, is safety. And we are at places that certainly don't have a reputation for a great safety culture. So therefore, it's particularly critical how we instill a safety culture in a place like Russia, in a place like Brazil, or in a place like Suriname, you know, to name a few. Just to give you an idea of what we're up against here, or Russia, you know. So what we saw is actually that whenever there is a perception from the employees that safety is not the high priority or highest priority on site, employee engagement is not happening. It's actually totally disengaged, right? But then there comes a point, interestingly, when employees believe that leadership cares about safety, that it's not contributing to higher engagement. Right? Which is kind of logical when you think of some of the stuff that some of us have learned, false or not, the Maslow's pyramid of hierarchy of motives, I think it was called, right? It's kind of a hygienic factor, right? I mean, if you believe that you're working at a place where the value of your own safety is not really valued, then you say, how much worse can it get, right? And then you basically say, there's no engagement here, I'm not going to throw myself in if there's not even the minimal respect here for my personal safety, right? The moment it gets into, hey, I believe, and which luckily is the case at most of our sites, right, that people do see a very strong engagement and do feel that, the moment it gets to that, then other factors kick in. And the factor that kicks in for us, and I believe that's probably also generalizable, so to say, is the communication element. The feel for being part of the larger picture, being part of driving the company into the right direction. But to be part of it, you want to understand what is the larger vision. What is it that the company really wants to do? How is my direct job contributing to the value here? And that connects it directly to our discussion, the shareholder value discussion. The more you can do to make the person understand the value of your own job is contributing to the value of we do as a company at large, the better it gets, right? So that's the employee thing. The second thing is the customers, and it's obvious if you don't have a product and a service to sell, you know, you don't have a business, right? So whoever wants to tell you that you can create shareholder value without customers, I wonder how that is possible. I'd love to hear more about it. You know, seems to be a new world's formula then. You know, so I think it's not possible. You know, so therefore you better know what your customers are thinking. You know, if you just look at your order book and believe that's sufficient, yeah, you may have a surprise, because you might just have gotten taken over by the competitors who have been working on something and you have not seen it. So therefore, you want to look around the corner. You want to have early warning signals, and the early warning signal that we measure is what's called Net Promoter Score. There's been a lot of research around on what really makes a satisfied customer, and a lot of research also around is what damage does an unsatisfied customer do, right? And interestingly, in that social research, it shows, and we all, I would, when I was first confronted with this stuff, I mean 10 years ago or so, I thought it made a lot of sense, because when I was unsatisfied, I talked about it a lot, you know, because I was angry, you know, and I tried to turn a lot of people away from the products or services of that respective company, and I think I was successful with it. So the destructive power of an unsuccessful customer is enormously high. So that's where this concept of Net Promoter Score comes in, because in the end, it's a question of how many do you have that are passionate followers of your product and that are willing to speak up and be advocates for your product. That's why great brands are great brands, you know, because people talk about it, and great brands typically have very few detractors as these people that are negative get labeled. So we are doing this Net Promoter Score for now 4 years for all of our businesses worldwide. In an industrial environment, it's not that easy to pull that off. but I think we have learned to do it in the right way. We have a couple of, and the good news is we've made strong improvements on that front, also on the measurement side. But we have a couple of rules around it that we established. One rule is if you happen to have a detractor, I have forgot to mention one thing. The interview is an in-person interview administered by an outside firm, right? So if the outside firm realizes that there's a detractor, that we just hit a detractor, because this is obviously, this is not anonymous. I mean, people know that they are interviewed on Alcoa and that they interview them because they are customers of ours, right? But if they hit a detractor, our internal rule is in 24 hours, the respective manager of that business that is a supplier to this customer has to call that individual, right? And listen to what the person has to say, right? I tell you what, we've turned more detractors at least into neutral or some into big fans, started to really change the dynamics by calling detractors back, you know, because that's, and I guess some of you have seen similar behaviors by others, you know, when you are really mad about a company and somebody calls you then after you just gave that feedback and you can basically get all the steam off, you start to build a neutral frame. So that's the second element there in terms of value creation. Third element is community. And I could tell you 500,000 stories about where community comes in. I just give you one little piece there. I mean, we have at every of our sites, we have a community advisory board because we very much believe that and in some of our businesses, literally spoken, the license to operate, but in every business, it's figuratively spoken, we need a license to operate. We want to be part of the community because everything else would be odd. Now, the good news is we are, in most cases, not in urban environments. So urban environments have the unfortunate dynamic that you start to forget, you know, that you have a responsibility also for the community and that the community can treat you well or harm you badly, right? So we are in rural environments and therefore see very much what role we have. So in all of these sites we have advisory boards, community advisory boards, get together with the community. We measure the employee engagement in the community in terms of hours spent in the community. We very actively encourage people to play part in the community. And that can have extreme forms like it did when Iceland was hit by the financial crisis, when we literally use our facilities for re-education purposes and use some of our management to help people to understand how do I personally refinance my household, you know, because I'm literally bankrupt, you know. So these type of things we very strongly promote. And I'd be happy to talk more about this, but I think it gives you an idea as a starter. One other theme that was thrown at me was the point of Germany, right? Because seems to be this, I don't know how to phrase this, the belief after Germany had been called the sick man in Europe, that now it's always the same. Pendulum always swings too far. Now suddenly everybody talks about the German model as being the success model. Obviously, both is not true, right? But there are elements. That one has to understand that are helpful to be competitive. I mean. And there are some that are not understood, and it would be a disaster to adopt them, I would believe, you know, having lived through them. Let's start with the second element first. I mean, Germany is by law co-determined. So co-determined sounds wonderful. Basically means that on the level of the supervisory board, half of the members of the supervisory board are employee representatives, and the majority of those are members that are union members. And the minority of those union members are coming outside of the company. So most of those are union members that are kind of full-time union members that basically are union bureaucrats or whatever you want to call this. A very interesting dynamic. Be happy to talk more about it. I don't believe that that's a good export model. A good export model. A good export, and it hasn't been exported, you know. So even though, and I come to that, Germany is very strong when it comes to exporting, you know. So The second one, which I think is an export model, is it also has by law, and this is a lot of that comes from the experience after the Second World War, because the country was in shambles, and when you look at most places being ruins, you know, and literally in many towns, the discussion was, do we even rebuild it, or do we build a town at a different place, you know? And most decided to rebuild it at the place where it was before. But pretty amazing. So they said the last thing we need is, I mean, to have a divided community. We have so few capability left. So let's work together, even though we don't agree on everything. You know, that's where it stems from. So by law, out of that also came that every facility that has, I think, more than 50 people has the not right is enforced by law to have an employee representation elected. And this is not unionized. It can be unionized, but it's not necessarily unionized, you know. But if you have a facility that's above 50, you basically have to have elected group of employee representatives. And I think that's a good thing, to be honest, you know, because it structures also the voice of the employees. And I've seen that in my lifetime to be an enormous help to management in terms of what I said earlier on. I mean, to make understood to the employees what you want to do. Because you need kind of a transmission, or it's not you don't need it, but it's helpful to have a transmission there, because very often you don't reach far down in the organization, or you reach far down in the organization, but your voice is not credible, right? Or you don't say it in the words that are understood. You know, if you have people that are elected as the ones, I mean, to represent the employees, they can help you on all of these fronts. Always assuming that you engage with them. If you don't engage with them as management, it's your own fault, right? So what else did I have here as my starting point? Yes. Well, we can talk about also then what happened under the Schröder times. I don't want to go into all of this, which was called Agenda 2010. But the most important thing that happened at that time, and that's the foundation of why Germany is today so competitive, is that basically master contracts that existed throughout Germany were basically not signed anymore. And the contracts, the labor contracts, were side by side. And why do I mention something that sounds like a little thing? It was actually totally foundational for the change. Because before that, you had companies like Siemens had one frame contract that was signed for all of the sites in Germany, you know, every 3 years or so, right? So obviously, each site had different dynamics and different competitive environments, right? So the moment, and everybody was hiding under one frame contract, right? So it totally took away the discussion on the employee side. What is truly the competitiveness of our business here in Germany today? What do we have to do to be competitive? The moment this plug was pulled, and it sounds like it was simple, but it was brutal actually, it enforced a dialogue from the business leaders with the employees about the competitiveness. And which in the end, in my view, is the only right thing you can do. And it enforced, to be frank, and saying we cannot build any more standard motors in Würzburg, you know, because there's nobody else who builds them here, and basically the competitor that comes next has a 1/3 lower cost position that you have, right? It's impossible. But there are new innovations around, right? So let's have investments here. But let's at the same time find a sister plan in Hungary or Czech Republic where we move the standard motor, and let's focus here on the next round of innovation. For that then also we need to requalify the people, right? Because the qualification level of people is not in tune with what you need for the future. And obviously then you will not be able to pay the wages, you know, because obviously cut wages, not a good idea, right? Because in the end living costs are high, you know. So, but then you are right in the discussion of what do you have to do to earn the wages, right? And the only way to earn the wages is make the next step in terms of education. How do you do the next step in education? You then target it towards what is real in that business, right? So this as the spread, as it rolls through Germany, a debate that literally happened at every side. And at the same time, what also happened there is that the companies decided to actually pay the unions for consultant work. If the unions said, we don't believe in what you're saying, and trust me, they said it about 100% of the cases, right? So but they didn't have the capacity to evaluate that, right? And at that time, we believed that, and I very much still believe that if intelligent people look at the same facts, they come to the same conclusion, right? So we had to break the boundary of having people understand what really are the dynamics there. So we said, okay, look, I mean, we pay for, you can choose whatever consulting firm you want, you can bring a top-notch consulting firm, we pay for it, and they will take this plan apart. You know, and whatever good stuff you find and whatever creative solution you find on the shop floor, we are more than happy to engage with you. It was unbelievably messy. It was unbelievably messy. Because suddenly, many people felt the rug was pulled underneath them, but that discussion was the discussion that was needed, because it finally made it a real discussion, not this blah, blah, you know, high level, you know, what we need high level, the stuff that we see here in the US now 24/7. Right? That's my frustration here, right? We have not yet broken down to that level. When I go visit the plants here, fortunately, the discussion is different, right? But it has not happened on the larger agenda there, you know? So, and then obviously the export part, and I could talk forever, you know, so as you figured out by now. So whatever. I hope this got enough stuff out there that we have a good discussion.
You tossed a little tinder on the fire there at the end, so we'll have a lively discussion. First of all, let me just say how pleased I am to be here, and I appreciate Donna, Dabney's, and the conference board's invitation. I'm also particularly pleased to be here with you because you really bring a very special perspective that you just began to get into kind of the nitty-gritty, and that is you have operated as the CEO of major companies in two very different cultural, political, and social environments. There's no question about it. And there's so many ways, so many questions to ask, it's almost hard to begin. But let me just toss a couple of facts on the table. We've been told in America that, and this gets us, I believe, towards issues of stakeholder and shareholder capitalism. We've been told in America that because of global competition, particularly because of low-cost wages in China and among the Asian tigers in Asia, that corporations cannot maintain the workforces they've had, they cannot raise wages, and we cannot stay in the manufacturing world. We've got to move to a service economy to be competitive. Now, what's really interesting to me in doing the research for my book, Who Stole the American Dream, I did a bit of looking into Germany. And today, Germany has about 21% of its workforce in manufacturing, whereas the United States has about 9% of its workforce in manufacturing, which suggests that somebody took a different fork in the road, okay?
True.
Secondly, you would say, well, that means, and the next thing I found out was that since 1985, German corporations have raised the pay of their average workers, median workers, 5 times faster than in the United States, roughly 5 to 1. And you would think that was a formula for disaster, but from 2000 to 2010, the United States had a trade deficit of $6 trillion and Germany had a trade surplus of $2 trillion, okay? How do you account, somebody who's worked in both of these environments, how do you account for those radically different results? Is there something in the way managers are motivated? Are there different social factors at work? What's going on?
No, I don't think that managers are motivated differently. I think the big part is in what I started to talk about just now. You know, right. I think it was really a breakthrough to have people understand what's the competitiveness of what I'm doing here on the side, right? And not sugarcoat it, because that leads to exactly the question of how much can I pay, right? And it leads to a dynamic view, because let's use this example, which is a real-life example of the Standard Motor in Würzburg, right? So, you can see these things there. If you produce a standard motor, that basically is like a commodity. It literally gets sold by tons. How many tons does that thing have? And then you have a certain price at it. And I would say probably labor cost, because it's still pretty manual. Let's say labor cost. The labor cost content in the total cost is probably 30%, right? But that still matters, If you suddenly have 30%, and obviously if you have that thing manufactured, which is also a real-life example in Mexico, you can ship it anywhere, or in Czech Republic. I mean, you have labor costs that are probably half. So you immediately get a 15% advantage on total cost, right? There's no way you can compensate for it. You can now say, okay, look, I'm going to give you 10% more. You've just decreased your competitiveness, right? So there's no way out of it other than saying, I don't have a chance with a standard motor. I cannot manufacture it here, period, right? So now does that mean you have to throw the kid out with the bathtub? No, because then the discussion is, well, is this the end of the rope for motors? Is there no innovation left? And the answer is no, there is innovation left, right? And then the question is, so what is the next level of innovation, and what do I have to do? You suddenly realize the next level of innovation in this case are specialized drives. So what you do need for this is you need a lot of electronics attached to it, right? So you suddenly say, I need electronics and I need software. I don't have anybody on my plan who has understanding of electronics or software, zero. Because before a motor, you have to have somebody who does the winding, that's it, and then the rest is casting, put it together, that's it, right? So you then suddenly say, oh, wow, even though I have a plan for a new drive, but if I were to manufacture that, my manufacturing environment would look entirely different, right? Okay, well, not only would my manufacturing environment look entirely different, but the skill set I have for the future here, I need now people who have a basic understanding of how to manufacture electronics. I need some people who can do basic software programming, right? So if you know that, you can now say, how do I transition this here into my future? And in this case of Würzburg, what happened is the deal that we cut with the workers was to say, help me find a site, help you find a site where we can manufacture standard motors and be competitive, because I don't want to get out of that business, right? But because I have the customers, right? Why give up the business entirely? But help me find a sister plant, and then you help the sister plant to get educated to build a standard motor. You do that. Your people are going to do that. So
who has the responsibility here for the retraining? I mean, is it the company? Is it the union? Is it the employer representative?
No, at this
or is
point
it
in time,
public-private cooperation?
at this point in time, I'm talking, but I'm not even at the retraining of the people. I'm saying, well, help me find a plan somewhere else where you are going to transfer your product to that other plant. You are literally basically playing the grave digger for your own plant, right? But if you do that and enable the others, it helps us to stay in that segment. Eventually, you still have components that you can ship there. At the same time, we are bringing up the new plant, right? We are basically throwing all the crap out, building up this new facility. And we're doing the retraining. The retraining always is a public-private partnership, right? And that's a long tradition in Germany. It's always a public-private partnership.
Very important. Public-private partnership.
Well, but that's kind of always been the same here. We just forgot about it.
Well,
the community colleges.
Wait a second. It's always been the same here, but we've had steadily declining commitments in the federal budget to worker retraining because of job globalization.
But at the same time, I also feel that, look, I mean, the federal budget is nice to have a federal budget, but this type of requalification can only be done well if it is targeted towards the specific needs of a region. And I'm talking about a very specific region there. In Würzburg, it was possible then to design the programs for what we needed, right? Basically to say, so what exactly do we have to educate here? Because then you are sending somebody to, I mean, kind of the equivalent of a community college. And the person, you do it over a transition of 3 years, roughly. It takes 3 years, So you say, I now know this is my plan. Now I start to filter out who is there, who I can bring on, who's young enough to become a programmer. right? These are people that just joined the workforce. They have some capabilities of playing warfare on their computer. You know, why not, instead of playing warfare, you know, why not make them into basic programming? So then you design a program and say, well, why don't you enter it? And over a 3-year time frame, let's say every Friday plus then a block of, I don't know what, 4 weeks a year, you know, you go through that program and you become a programmer.
You're talking about a highly collaborative approach.
Highly collaborative.
Highly collaborative.
Super collaborative.
Okay, well isn't that partly the essence of stakeholder capitalism as opposed to shareholder?
Absolutely is. And if you forget about it, I mean, I think you've just lost on the principle, which I threw out before. Shareholder value is only created when these things come together, right? And if they are not coming together, that's why I feel so wonderful about doing all these things, because, I mean, if somebody says, how do you create more shareholder value? I mean, I'd say, I mean, for us to be seen as so strong on the safety side or so strong on the sustainability side, that's the reason why Iceland gave us a license to build a smelter, why they next door to us.
So now you were talking about, excuse me, you're talking about a 3-year transition.
Yes, in this case.
And if you're working in America, and the hedge funds and the Wall Street analysts are looking at your next quarterly report, and you're not going to get a payoff here on this 3-year transition, how are you going to satisfy people in this country? Is a German CEO under the same short-term pressure from Wall Street and the markets as an American CEO?
Absolutely. I mean, the same quarter, many of the larger German companies are listed in the US also, and even if they are not, there's quarterly reporting. So I would say the financial market today is an international market. So you have the same type of pressures, you know. Now you could say, well, there is a Mittelstand, which most of those are private companies, small to medium-sized private companies. But in reality, I mean, it's only camouflage. They are under the same pressures, right? There's one other aspect there, and I kind of implicitly mentioned it. You have to have technology, right? And it's extremely well understood. I mean, I pretended in this example, which was the case, that the technology was there, right? But if you haven't invested before into R&D, I mean, you are faced with a situation that you don't have a new motor, right? The situation here was different because we had invested in the future. We did have a new solution there, right? But if you haven't invested in there, but I would call that really dumb management. And I would say that that individuals that run a company like that, I mean, should rather be weeded out, you know.
But I got to come back to that question I asked you before. How has Germany as a nation, how have the German corporations, whether they're large or Mittelstand, kept 21% of the workforce in manufacturing? Those are high-tech, high-wage jobs that have gone through and the United States has 9%. That's got to reflect different sets of decisions, not just in an individual company, but repeated again and again and again on both sides. So there's something about the environment that's different. There's something about the mindset. What is it?
I used the example just for you the Würzburg example, just for you to understand better, I mean, the dynamics, right? But this, what I described there, basically happened systemically, right? I mean, this was just one example. This is a systemic situation, a deep understanding of what drives your competitiveness, and also a deep understanding.
When you say systemic, you mean German-wide?
Yes, yes, that's what I mean.
And so there's this mindset on the part of both management and employee representatives, whether unionized or not, that it's going to take a bunch of collaborative decisions and strategies to move from outmoded and globally non-competitive technology and production into a more competitive arena to further the German economy, to further the corporation, and to benefit the workers.
And there's one other element to it. I mean, everybody looks at the world market. So everybody would understand when, everybody's a tough word, but most people would understand that you cannot survive if you look only at a regional market, and certainly not if you are just number one in Germany. They would clearly understand the world market, and they would also understand you have to go to test your strategy, you have to go to the most competitive market, which used to be the US, but today it's China, right? So, and if you don't win in those markets, you know, you are toast, right? Or your life might not be that long-lived, right?
But you mentioned before this regional notion, and you've talked in other venues about the importance of the social contract. What do you mean by the social contract, and why is it important, and how does it work in that kind of stakeholder environment?
Well, I think the why is clear, right? We talked about that. Why does it work?
What is it? When you say the social contract, what do you mean?
Well, it's a dialogue, I would say. I mean, it's a dialogue. That's what it starts with, you know. So it's a constant dialogue between all forces of society that play a role here, right? And I would say that it's the unions certainly. I mean, and also be clear that the unions would challenge a business strategy and would want to understand whether it's competitive or not, right? I mean, the union would today be a very strong force. I mean, very strong force for saying, hey, we are not convinced that plan is a plan that solves for competitiveness, because I think that they've learned the lesson in a very, very hard way that they don't want to have industry built like in my old hometown, Bremen. They had one of the biggest shipbuilding industry, and boom, it went bankrupt, you know, after having received millions and millions of subsidies, and literally pulled the town in which it was into a deep financial crisis. And what was the outcome? Nothing. I mean, everything was moved away, and I will never forget these things when Korean workers came. They had basically bought the equipment. It was brand new equipment there in the shipyard. They brought Korean teams that basically disassembled it, right? And the first thing they did is they hung up in Korean language. They hung up large posters. Can you imagine that? I mean, basically a town just lost, I mean, the major industry that every taxpayer has basically paid their taxes to, and that has gone into that. And then they sell the equipment and the Koreans come to take it down. I mean, they didn't do it because they wanted to be nasty. It was their pride on getting good equipment for cheap, right? They didn't think of any media effects of it, you know, but...
in that kind of circumstance, whether you're in North Rhine-Westphalia or Baden-Württemberg or wherever in Germany, the equivalents of Ohio and Pennsylvania and Texas and California and America, what does the local state or the local government do, and what's the trade-off? What's the engagement there? You said there was a dialogue in terms of the social contract. You're talking about labor and management. What about the public-private dialogue?
Same thing. I mean, they would always be engaged, and I mean, but yeah, they were always.
So, what did that mean in the case of Bremen and the lost business? Or was it too late?
That was too late, and they were very engaged. They were very engaged. This was what I'm talking about. The shipbuilding happened in the 70s, early 70s, basically, right? And at that time, the model was not as then later in the Schröder days, right? Because Germany had learned a lesson very, very, very tough, because they lost a lot of business, you know, shipbuilding being one of those, right? So I think they learned their lesson, that innovation is innovation and export orientation, and the orientation towards global competitiveness is the only way how you can go forward.
But you're also talking about being done jointly.
It has to be done jointly, absolutely. And don't get me wrong, there had been extremely painful parts in it. Extremely painful parts, right? Because it also means that you are enforcing changes in the society, right? So there was a deep cut on the side of the unemployment benefits, deep cut, you know, and including checks on whether people that were signed up for unemployment really were unemployed or working kind of a little bit in the back, right? So. And strong engagement also in the re-education at the same time.
Every major corporation, whether German or French or American, is going to think of itself as a global corporation in the sense that it markets to the world and may produce something around the world. But is there a sense that among German corporate leaders that they want to contribute something to the German economy, that there's a certain pride there, or there's a stake in the success of the economy?
I think it's the same then here. I would say that that there are some do, some don't. You know.
Well, I'm struck.
But in the end, I think those that understand that if you don't bring these forces together, you won't have sustainable success. You know, that's
A sustainable success where?
with
In
the
Germany
business
or
worldwide.
worldwide?
I think it's a worldwide formula. I don't think that there's any place on this planet where you can literally think that you get away with murder for a longer time if you are not behaving well in the community, or where you are basically not getting your workforce to be engaged.
Are there public policies, though, that encourage German companies, say public policies in Germany that are different from public policies in the United States? Tax system, regulation, subsidies, a variety of tools that are available in the public sector.
There are some, but you're really getting down in the weeds. I mean, one instrument that was used very strongly in the last downturn was this thing called short labor law, where you literally, as a company, you could say, I'm not firing the person, you know, but the person doesn't have to come to work and still stays on the payroll for, I think originally it was for 12 months and they extended it for 18 months. The logic for that, and it, I think half of it is paid, you basically pay the person a quarter to half, right? Something like that of the original salary, and then up to 60% of the total pay. The rest is matched up by the state, right? So the logic behind that is to avoid that people are literally leaving to go to other companies and giving people a kind of a social network, you know. But because as they are highly skilled, and as they have a lot of experience in the particular business, I mean, if you lose them and they walk away, and if you are only having a cyclical downturn, which at that point in time people thought, now they know better, you know, but for Germany it has worked out very well, you know, to come through a cyclical downturn, instead of the company basically laying them off and they walk away, you know, you find a buffer so that they don't walk.
This
right?
is the short week. Right? I mean, maybe they went from 37.5-hour week down to a 30-hour week.
No. This was a different. This was a different instrument. Basically, those people did not come to work at all anymore. You know, for that time frame until you pull the plug again and say, "No, I want you to come back to work." You know, but it wasn't that. It wasn't that they were officially not unemployed, right?
Were German companies offshoring? Have they been offshoring as many jobs percentage-wise as American companies have been?
I don't know the American and the German percentages, but I would say that the question of outsourcing and gaining competitiveness has been the same in both places.
Except that I keep coming back to 21% of the workforce is still in manufacturing. Something has been done which has been very effective to keep those jobs.
But the something, I don't know why I'm not getting my message through here. You know, the something that you're looking for is the something means you got to understand that technology and innovation is crucial to your future. You know, standing still means sliding down, right? And pretty much everybody gets it, right? So that has fundamental implications for how you run your firm. You know, you need to make sure that also on a CEO level, you not only look at your current products, but you also look at what you have in the pipeline, right? And what's the quality of my R&D staff? That's one thing. Secondly, it's the orientation towards the world market. I mean, I don't think anybody accepts a proposal where people would say, well, I can sell that anywhere other than, you know, let's say USA and China, you know, because this will not be competitive, right? And thirdly, there is a constant understanding in the employees that they have to educate themselves constantly. Otherwise, their employability is going to go down. And there are systems which allow that they can get constantly educated without leaving their job, right? It's very simple. It's kind of like a societal norm, you know. And then, I mean, you have on top of it, you have the apprenticeship model, which also allows the education to be much more focused. So instead of, I mean, I've said that publicly, I think we have here in the US gone a little bit overboard because we've created this new norm of saying it's K to 12 and then it's college and then you find a job, my friend, right? So that doesn't work for everybody, you know. In Germany you have the apprenticeship system, And people can leave school after 9th grade, you know, when they are 16, and then learn to become an auto mechanic. And when you see the dynamics of somebody who you want to teach math when they are in 10th grade, right? I mean, have a lesson with somebody who's in 10th grade, probably 17 years old, you know, and you want to teach math, you know, for somebody who's not a math genius. I mean, those people most likely will not listen. But if you go into an apprenticeship model and have the person become an auto mechanic, you know, you don't teach math. You teach the person what it needs to tune the computer, you know, to get another sound out of the motor. Right? And there you need a lot of math for, because you see this oscillation on the screen and you now explain, you know, change the oscillation and suddenly the motor sounds differently. You know, that's a totally, and it's a 17-year-old kid, you know, you're learning math. But in the one context, you're learning it in a class environment, you know, in the other one, you're learning it and you're thinking, hey, you know, if I can tune my car going home tonight, I mean, what does that mean for my attractiveness in the field, right? So entirely different. And that's what happens with the apprenticeship model. It's applied, you earn a little bit of money, you know, and it's applied education, right?
Yeah. I remember I covered that in this country, and I remember a kid in high school saying, he went to a printing company, and he said in high school they wanted to teach me math. He said, but I'm over here. He said, I can do all this stuff here. He said, the difference between that math and the math I'm learning is night and day. He said, this is really cool.
Exactly.
And the teacher said, he's learning more math over here than he was back in school. It's tougher math. Yeah. Let me bring you to America. And I'm riding on the shuttle up from Washington this morning. I was struck by the headline, recovery in U.S. lifting profits, not adding jobs. Wall Street is buoyant. A gulf is widening as federal budget cuts take effect. Down here, result has been a golden age for corporate profits, especially among the multinational giants that are also benefiting from faster growth in emerging economies like China and India. And the story went on to say that since 2008, corporate profits have risen 20% a year in America, while median disposable income has risen 1.4% a year. 20% in profits, 1% in wages. It doesn't sound like that same kind of engagement that you were talking about. It doesn't sound like the same kind of sharing and struggling to work things out that you were talking about when you were talking about Germany.
No. I think you're jumping to conclusions too fast here, you know. Because when I read something like that, you know, and I see, okay, profits have increased 20%, and you said correctly that this was very strongly driven by the emerging markets, right? And now you're making the connection to how has the American worker benefited from it, right? I mean, I would say let's not forget. I mean, these profits, and I think it's always because when it's so big numbers, you have to peel the onion, you know. But why have companies been so successful? Is it because of the American footprint? Or has it been because they have very successfully been able to get into emerging markets and the money is earned in emerging markets? And you also have people there that you want to have benefiting from that. And when you look at income increases in most of the emerging markets, you are talking about 3-digit increase numbers, right? So I think the first thing that has to be understood there is that's this export orientation that I meant. I think it's not really strongly understood here that you really work for getting a global product out or playing in the global marketplace. You have to bring it back, you know, to understand what are the opportunities here. You have to bring it back to the competitiveness of my side, right? Then it becomes a real discussion, right? If you leave it on this high level, companies, because they have an American name, you know. In a way, you wonder what is an American company today, you know. So and therefore you say therefore the profits have to benefit the American. Where I had discussions, you know, recently. I mean, we are building a large system in Saudi Arabia currently, right? And together with a Saudi partner, and it is because for a whole host of reasons, but for us, energy plays an enormously important role. The reason why Saudi Arabia is super attractive is because we got given a gas field by the king, right? So, and a full-fledged brand new infrastructure, including a brand new port, right? And a 600-kilometer railway link. You know, it's very hard to beat that. That's why this facility is the lowest cost worldwide, not just for Alcoa, but worldwide. It's the lowest cost facility on the cost curve. Super competitive. Right?
Enormous subsidies from the Saudi government and the Saudi monarchy, right?
Well,
enormous.
Look, I can decide whether our competitor profits from it or whether I profit
I
from
understand,
it.
I understand, but it's very important that we understand that that's because of subsidies, not because of labor costs.
Well, be careful to label something, right? Label something as subsidy. I mean,
how would you free facilities?
Well, how would you argue in a situation that you are next to a shale gas field in the U.S., you know, and you suddenly have very low gas costs there, right? They are not giving it for below the cost. You know, I'd say that they are looking at it from their own national competitiveness point of view. They have gas there, so they feel they can give it away and use it for building up other value add. And by the way, one of the major reasons why they do it is because they want to have employment. But what I wanted to say there is, now I'm having a discussion, so we are doing that, and what this means is the competitiveness for Alcoa is increased through this. And currently, I mean, we are already in the building phase. We have a lot of Alcoans that are worldwide that are supporting the building there, right? So there are enormous benefits for us already in the building phase, and certainly once this thing is in production. So it's the right thing to do. But now the discussion is, I recently had a retiree saying, why are you not doing that in America, right? So I'm saying, well, because there is no such opportunity in America, right? But we have other opportunities where it makes total sense to invest here in the US. For instance, you know, we have just added, and we haven't yet finished it, in Davenport, you know, our aerospace facility, largest aerospace worldwide facility, right? We are building an automotive capability to build, in the future, to build aluminum for cars here, because finally, in the US, lightweighting has become a very important thing. Why? Because it brings fuel efficiency up, right? And this is now one of the first decision criteria of US consumers, you know, which hasn't been around before, right? Plus, there's intelligent legislation that supports it, right? So there it makes sense. We are investing heavily when it comes to aerospace, right? We've invested heavily and bought firms also in the aerospace field here in the US. That makes total sense because we have a customer close to it. It's strongly driven by innovation. That's what's driving my competitiveness. The answer to your conundrum is, if you don't have a competitiveness discussion, if you don't put the competitiveness discussion first, you will not find the right answer.
Mm-hmm. Would you agree with Dominic Barton, who wrote in the Harvard Business Review that in terms of competitiveness, I don't know.
I typically agree with him.
Yeah, but, well, I know. But, I mean, since he runs McKinsey, fairly smart guy. But he talks about what he calls the failures in corporate leadership and governance in America because of the tyranny of short-termism. He says we've got to rewire, these are his words, rewire the fundamental ways we govern, manage, and lead corporations. Now, his picture of how most American corporations are run, and we're not talking about Alcoa now, of course, okay? But his picture is really sort of at odds with at least what I think I've heard from you. And I just wonder, well, he says that corporations and corporate leaders are driven by the tyranny of short-termism. They feel pressured by the market, by Wall Street, by hedge funds, by corporate analysts, by the financial media, to come up with either results or to manage the expectations of the market, which is very different from the kind of long-term corporate building you're talking about through the stakeholder vision that you've laid out here. And I just wonder whether or not in the environment you're in, whether or not you'd agree with his assessment that this is a problem that we have in this country at the moment or not?
In principle, I agree with his point of view. The problem I have in endorsing it in a general fashion is because I've unfortunately also seen the bad side of long-termism and something that was labeled as long-termism, but in reality was sloppy management, right? And that's the problem, right? You see, because I very much, I mean, the way I run the firm is I very much expect that my team knows their numbers, right? And we have every week, we have a short executive call, which is every Tuesday morning, worldwide, typically lasts half an hour to an hour. Every 4 weeks, we have a 1.5-day review session, and every 3 months, we have a 3.5-day session as a review, right? So, and I very much believe that it's important for people to be very close to their business and that they have to understand the numbers, But that doesn't mean that you have to manage the company for short term. You want to manage the company for right value add, So I think in the end, it all comes down to, do you select the right leaders or don't you, and do you have a good supportive board, right, that also doesn't fall into the sword of how do you call this? I mean, populism, populism are being pushed against the wall, And if you have these things right, I think the model works, and there are a lot of great examples, not just Alcoa, where this has worked very, very well in the U.S. as well as other places, even though they do all do quarterly reporting.
What's interesting to me is you were talking about Germany, you got to Mittelstand, you talked about private ownership, family ownership, with the implication that being somehow protected or sealed off from the pressures of the market made it easier for people running those Mittelstand companies to think long term.
Well, but the reality, yeah, that's the common rhetoric, and I think you can have a lot of examples. I was only
quoting you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, you also learn, right? I mean, so I think that's true for some, but you can also have some examples where that led exactly to this type of behavior where you didn't push enough, And when you see today what is the problem in some of the Mittelstand firms, is succession planning, big problem, because most, as you correctly said, are family-owned companies, so the founder or the founder's son or daughter, they have taken it over into the next generation and have been able to keep it in the family, but more and more often, kind of the family branches kind of get very, very diverse. How do you keep these things together? And there's quite a number of cases around where the succession planning has been done very badly.
Do you think it has a good effect on the mindset, the thinking, the strategies of corporate leaders to be paid enormous sums of stock grants and stock options? Or does that tend to cause them to think more in terms of managing expectations and reporting in ways that make it look as though the corporation is doing better than it is?
Very much depends. First of all, I believe that aligning the management with the shareholders is a good idea, right? I think that's a good idea, as long as you do it in the right fashion, right? So to not have people benefit from short-termism, you can design an incentive model which takes care of that. I think if we look at our incentive model, I mean, I think it has enough in there, for people to benefit from the right behavior, right? Stock and options, yes, I think they are a good component. I think that the U.S. has got it more right than wrong in most cases. And I'm not talking about these plans that basically had accelerators in there and then were very short-term oriented for 1 year just. If you have this for a longer term periods with some holding periods, with some clawback options or so, I think that's all the right stuff.
I go around the country, talk to people. You certainly see opinion polls. Pretty high public mistrust of business at the moment, particularly Wall Street in America. There was a Harvard study done not too long ago that found that at least 850 corporations where the boards and the CEOs manipulated the stock options, actually falsified and redated the stock options so they could get a payoff. In the case of Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, the top 5 officers of those failed investment banks walked away with $1.5 billion in stock options and cash bonuses in the last 3 years of those corporations. When you see that, how do you say what you just said? I think America's got it just about right.
Well, I'm obviously thinking more about after all this discussion has happened. I'm thinking about where is it today, I mean, I think that those numbers are staggering, you know, and I think there has been excessive times. I thought your question was more targeted, where are we today on the previous
well,
one? You know, so
I have to remain a little skeptical that there's been that much change.
well, but then what's the alternative, you know? What is the alternative?
Well, the Swiss just voted to have an alternative, which was to put a lid, number one, to have binding votes by shareholders.
Okay, you open Pandora's box with that. Because who's the shareholder now, right?
Well, then what does shareholder capitalism mean? I mean, you're right. There's so much churning in ownership, and there's so much inactivity, passivity on the part of, say, mutual funds that represent masses of. They almost never get involved. Why? Because they want to manage the pension funds of the corporation, so they don't want to offend the management. I mean, do we really, in terms of ownership influence, do we really have that in America?
No, but I think that the new game in town is shareholder activism. You know, now I know enough examples where that has not helped the company, and I also know some examples where it has been helpful to shake the board up. You know, so it's not black and white. You know, so if you basically say, you know, the Swiss vote is explainable through anger for right reasons. You know. And idiotic behavior by some colleagues there, you know, idiotic. I mean, irresponsible behavior, you know, irresponsible behavior, and it's as good as public opinion gets these days, you know. Right? If we run everything by public opinion poll, I don't know whether the society is going to be a better society then, right? I don't believe so, right? So. I mean, if you believe that the board basically has no role and you want the shareholders in a direct vote to decide anything, you know, I mean, aren't we killing things at the wrong place? I mean, the board understands what the company is all about, should give a good representation of shareholders. And that's what I meant. The U.S. has got it right. I mean, I think that having seen other models there, I think this is a good model, honestly.
Well, I'm going to turn this over to folks out here and see if they've got some questions. I would just say, in terms of recent behavior, I just remember the CEO of Citigroup, the board having voted him a $15 million compensation and having great protests rather quickly, and the board backed off. So in terms of the board being on top of it, sensing what the value was and so forth.
Whoa. I mean, the world is not black and white. I mean, there's an old German proverb. I mean, if you have a counter position, if you have one counter example, it makes the point of the theory is right, you know. Because
I don't think we're restricted
simple.
To one here. I don't think we're restricted to one. That was one that came to mind quickly. How about some questions out here? Please, go ahead.
It's actually two follow-up aspects to your story about the Standard Engine plans.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, number one was, what was the short-term effect on your stock price, on your financial results, when you started transitioning into the new plant in Hungary? Was it dilutive, or was it accretive, or neutral?
Well, this was not publicly traded. It was one part of. I mean, Siemens had at that time about 120 different businesses. Then that was one of the businesses, right? So it was one part that impacted the larger picture, you know. But if you look at the performance of the business went up, right, substantially up, because I mean, if you do this in a planned way, and you could also, employment also was not going down substantially, but it wasn't going up in Würzburg, you know. But what you then could do is you could pay people more because they also did jobs that were more value add, basically, and you had an innovative motor which you could charge for. You got a premium price, you know, for the innovation, you know. And I mean, people had a transition time by enabling this plant, which was built in the Czech Republic then, you know, which they found, and they moved over there, trained the people, and out of that also, I mean, it was a very fulfilling example for everybody, you know, because the friendships were built literally through this, And in a way, I mean, let's just not only look at it from a perspective of the people in Würzburg. Let's also put the glasses on of those that were in Czech Republic, who suddenly, I mean, this plant goes up there, they suddenly find a job, they suddenly get education and get good pay, you know. And that's, I think, the role of business worldwide. I mean, it's globalization has a very positive phase of bringing a lot of, I mean, livelihood to people, opportunities that they would have never had before.
Right. So it really was not in conflict with short-termist capitalism, what you did there. So then that brings me to my second question. In your opinion, was your average worker in that situation back in Germany, because they had to be retrained into this new innovative business, was their baseline educational preparedness for the workforce the equivalent of what it would be in America, or was it ahead?
The last numbers that I had seen, always keep in mind, I left 2007, but the last comparable numbers that I saw, there was a major difference between the preparedness in the US and in Germany.
Which way?
Germany was better.
Could you have pulled, or have you pulled off something like that in Alcoa in America, where the same kind of okay? Could you give us an example?
we have that. We have. I mean, I recently was visiting Whitehall, where we build the foils. We are #1 when it comes to the foils for aero engines. You know, and most of this is not aluminum. It's nickel alloys, and it's very, very innovative stuff, very cool stuff. And Whitehall, as you may not know or not know because you never heard it, you know, so it's not the center of the universe, it's not Manhattan, you know. So what we have there, we have a couple of programs there with the local community. I mean, programs, retraining programs for people that you can go through. Typically they last 3 years. And we have one there, for instance, for what we call a numeric control machine operator. You know, a lot of the machines, which is another interesting thing, you know, total new Pandora's box. So a lot of the future machinery will need to be computerized, you know, and we are bringing more and more robots in. And interestingly, we're not bringing the robots in because of cost. We're bringing them in because in this business, the precision that I need to go to the next level of innovation cannot be handled by human labor anymore, right? And that's a story that we haven't yet told, you know. That's why I believe if we don't crack the nut of retraining, we will be faced with a very, very dire, and it can be cracked. I mean, I've talked to some that have gone through this program in Whitehall, and they are all very, very happy, you know. And they get moved, they get elevated, and they make more money, right?
It's over here. Let's go ahead.
Hi, I want to first thank you for the refreshing beginning conversation when you talked about employee engagement. I think that really is the crust of the solution, is really understanding your employees and keeping, as you said, this continuous dialogue and the social contract. I'm very interested in how do you keep this culture of collaboration globally when you have country cultures that may be diametrically opposite to this open dialogue and discussion. I worked for McKinsey, which was one of the few enterprises in the world that created a very palatable, formidable corporate culture versus the impediment of a country culture. How does Alcoa do it globally?
Well, I think that I mean, having worked in different cultures, and I love really working in international environments, you know, I think that the cultural difference partially is overrated, in my view, because in the end it's a human being, right? And you have to start with the fundamental things that human beings like or don't like. We don't see any cultural differences in what I started out with saying. If people have the belief that safety is not top of mind in their leadership, they disengage, period, you know? And also, do we not see a cultural difference anywhere around the world? If people don't feel that they are respected, they also disengage, right? So you have to start with these type of fundamentals. Now, there are cultural differences when it comes to how they speak up, how they are willing to speak up, right? And I would say a place like Russia, you know, or a place like China, very hierarchical in a way societies. People do not and have not been used to speaking up. It takes a while to get there, and so let's be realistic. And very often it starts, no, not very often, always it starts with a local leader leading by example. If the local leader doesn't lead by example, you can do whatever you want. So now it comes back to the question of who do you make the local leader, right? So, and how do you train the local leader? We have built a very strong thing that we call Alcoa Academy, which is a worldwide thing with different levels of education. And the higher levels all happen multinational education groups, you know, so people, and direct with video and feedback, so people get a very strong idea on how they do in those type of critical situations, right? Because in the end, they have to feel more comfortable. So, but I'm not living in the illusion that we are perfect in this regards, you know, absolutely not. And you're right, McKinsey has a great culture there.
There are hands up all over the place, but yeah, right next to you. Go ahead.
Social media being the topic of the day, how, if at all, has social media changed the velocity of change in your organizations and the way in which people speak up? Because it is a new voice, and one voice can become extremely powerful.
Yeah, I would say that the impact of social media was preceded by other electronic forms of communication inside of companies, because I think the revolution, for me, email was a bigger revolution inside of the company than social media has been so far, you know, and I tell you why, because email allowed me to get my message unfiltered through to everybody, right? Because before, I mean, to your culture point earlier on, you know, so you have to assume that there are clay layers inside of the organization that filter your message, and I found it harder at that times to get my message through than since email basically is able to reach out. And now we have other instruments of communication. We have worldwide video conference, video feed, you know, we can build, and we have built kind of smaller groups which we can communicate to in a very interactive format, you know, through large conference calls, these sort of things, you know. So these type of instruments are there. But I would say that social media by itself, inside of the firm, has not really led to that much of an enabler. Outside, you're absolutely right, has totally changed the dynamics, not all to the better, frankly, right? Because the one problem, it's great that that barriers of access, media has become less of a barrier of access. At the same time, the credibility of the source very often is unchecked, you know, so you can cause quite a bit of issues, I mean, with false information, right? And it's become, I think, for all companies much harder how to deal with that, because it's become as I always say, a 25/8 world, you know, where it feels like 25 hours, 8 days a week, you know. And it's very hard, and I don't think anybody has yet found the answer, you know, how to best deal with that, you know. If there is a storm, you know, evolving, you know, how do you make sure that you can respond to it? And I think the best way is that you don't have a storm evolve, that's the first one, you know, or that you communicate proactively that a lot of stuff is somewhere on a platform so that people can see it, right? And therefore, it neutralizes itself, you know. But it's not a guarantee.
Anybody over here? Way in the back. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So in corporate governance, if we could continue that discussion a little bit, because this was very enlightening, but I do think that there's pressures on boards. There's been a lot of press about what boards have and haven't done. And one of the consulting firms talked about less than 20% of board members, in querying them, said they really understood the direction, the strategic direction of companies. And when you look at companies in the Fortune 500 today, 83% of the board seats are filled by men. So there's a bit of, I think, groupthink. And when we look at the financial crisis, there was a joke out there saying if it was Lehman Brothers and sisters, maybe we would not have had the financial crisis. So do you see in the forums in which you speak and operate, your colleagues, other chairmen and CEOs, do you see a trend to change some of that, to have term limits or to refresh a board, so that you can bring in people who really do understand that business and can speak up and work, you know, as with you as a CEO and chairman, with the knowledge.
I'd say I've seen two board environments. Well, I've seen more than two, but what have I seen? Let me be more general than what have I seen works very well. There's nothing that substitutes a good selection process for the board, right? And that's impossible. If you have the wrong people there, you know, you can't compensate for it. Secondly, I think you have boards that are functional because the tone in the board is the right tone. It's an open discussion. That tone can be set, needs to be set by the chairman, right? And if there's a chairman and a lead director, and our lead director happens to be here with Judy Guerin, you know, I think we have a very good, Judy, I don't know whether you want to comment on that, you know, I think we have a very collaborative fashion, you know, and the board regularly reminds me that they want to hear more about the strategy, right? And I think that is important, you know, you have to have some cadence during the course of the year where you have a strategy session, where we have an open dialogue. No, and if the statistic is right that 80% of the board members are saying that they don't understand the strategy, I mean, I don't know why they are not raising their voice or voicing this. And partially I think it's a question of you need to have an evaluation of the board members, a peer evaluation, you know, and you know, and at the same time, if they feel that the CEO is not giving them the right leadership or so, I mean, then they have it in their hands, you know, to change that situation too, right?
Do you think it was a good idea when there was a movement some time ago to separate the chairman and CEO positions so that you had an opportunity for more of a dialogue there, or not?
You know, that's so funny that you asked that, you know, because I have experienced this. I mean, I've experienced a situation of a CEO and chairman role being split. It was absolutely terrible. It was the worst, and I would never want to go back to that, frankly, you know.
You experienced that as a CEO,
yes,
not as a chairman.
As a CEO, I experienced that. Terrible situation because if you need to move fast with an organization, right, and you have a lot of people that don't want to move fast because change is not necessarily second nature to humans, right? So then what it allows people to portray a situation as though there is a split between a CEO and a chairman, and that might be totally factually wrong, right? But as long as it allows them to make that message in a decent way, they can cause enough of a disruption in terms of moving the company in the right direction. You know?
Can we get one last question way back in the corner there?
Behavior between the unions in Germany and management. Were there changes that had to occur on any level that enabled that? And,
yes.
And how do you experience that in the U.S.? Are there structural impediments here to having that kind of dialogue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it was basically a crisis, right? I mean, a crisis of competitiveness, right? Which was not labeled like this, but what people saw is that more and more companies did really not win in the environment, and that was a time when Germany was called a sick man in Europe, right? And there was good leadership not only from the companies but also from the political side, right? And out of the dialogue that happened there, this movement happened where basically no stone was untouchable, and it happened also at a time when there was a generational change on the union side. So I think it was, there were a couple of things that made it easier. The crisis certainly helped. The crisis and the understanding of a crisis helped to question the model and therefore to be open and to dust off some stuff that was there structurally but wasn't used right. Differences to the US, I think that, I believe we don't need to convince anybody we're in a crisis, right? I, at the same time, also, well, yeah, what needs to be done is we need to have a good social dialogue, and I think it needs to happen. It needs to happen starting from competitiveness. You know, I've been a strong advocate. I was very fascinated in the 80s, you know, when Ronald Reagan came in, and he found an environment which was basically talked down by the rest of the world very strongly. I mean, Japan was the winning country at that time. Everybody said US is losing. And he did something which I found was pretty good. I mean, he asked a couple of people to put a competitiveness report together, and this then turned into what Michael Porter's book, Competitiveness of Nations, right? When you read that, you actually see that this is really rich of good information at the time where certain industries stood in terms of their competitiveness in the US and what factors are needed to build it out, you know. I had lobbied when the downturn came that we do a revitalization of that, dust it off, I mean, put a couple of people together and do something like that. It's interesting that it seems that there's kind of a black spot there in the US political system that people ran away from it and basically said, no, this comes too close to industrial policy. It's a little cynical at a time when then at the same time heavy investments were going into supporting companies or whole industries, right, that we didn't want to have a good diagnosis. I believe we have to have a diagnosis, and the diagnosis will help to turn the dialogue into a sensational, you know, shallow, in my view, shallow discussion to a more substantive one. And what we will see is that there are industries which we currently don't see on the normal man's agenda, where the US is enormously competitive and has enormous advantages. We will also get a better understanding then, once we have that on, if we had that on paper, that there are God's gifts to this country that are unbelievable. Shale gas, I'm talking about shale oil, the energy independence. Who would have thought that by 2020, I mean, we will be energy independent? That alone allows for enormous things if we do it right. And then I would say that if you believe, which I do, that in the end talent is your most sustainable competitive advantage, this country has an advantage that no other country has. We have a monopoly on 7 billion people around the world. We can pick and choose the best and brightest. If we then so decide that we don't want anybody there, you know, from the outside, well, okay, that's our choice. But I think that dialogue on a more substantive basis would help us.
Let me just thank you on behalf of the audience. I'm sure you're going to get thanks from Donna Dabney, but I've enjoyed the dialogue. I appreciate it very much. I learned a lot from listening to you, and I'm sure everybody else did as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you again on behalf of the conference board, and I just want to make a personal statement here. I'm a former Alcoan, as they call us, you know. And I want to wish Alcoa a happy 125th anniversary. And also mention that last week, Alcoa announced that it once again was named as the world's most respected metals company by Fortune magazine. So thank you very much, Klaus and Hedrick. I appreciate your spending time with us today.